go ahead and at the conclusion of that and some comments, we'll open in regular session.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a workshop between the Budget Committee and the County Commission so that everybody is looking at this information at the same time. As we go through a number of different pieces of information, commissioners, feel free to jump in at any time, ask questions, whatever, just as we go through it. I'd ask that folks in the audience, you make a note on your questions, and we'll give you an opportunity later on to either comment or come back to things we covered earlier. I think that'll move us along a little bit quicker. What we'll be considering the funding for Scheme 6 at the Budget Committee meeting next week, and then it will move to the full commission in whatever form the Budget Committee sends it to the full commission. So that'll be the process while we're all here tonight. So let's get going. Mitch, you want to get us started?
I will do that. Chairman Matherly, I will correct my work that we haven't been working on this for the last week. We've been working on it the last 3 years. So. But anyway, you should have 3 pieces of information in front of you. I will say something. This first one looks like this. It will be a black and white copy. This is Kimberly Horn's National Facility Plan, and it's from the school system back in 2012-2013. I'm going to be going through it, but I thought you might like to have some what the gist was the catalyst to move us where we are today. The next document is one that looks like this. It's plain white, and we will touch on these in this presentation. These are the 6, 7 schemes that are kind of before the Mississippi School Board are all inside National or information policy at that point. And then the last thing that we are going to start on is one of those like this. In order to take a little paper, you will find 6 slides per page, one back off. And unfortunately, it all starts with the top right. So, as I pointed out a minute ago, this for where we are today is actually influence 12 in the Stone Street, Chicken Board, prepared the master plan and Washington Board of Education. One of the things that we want to keep in mind as we go through this process, of course, all the questions all throughout it. It's not an insignificant amount of work that the Board of Education has asked for, so it does have an impact on the amount of debt that this county takes on. What you see in front of you is essentially what our debt limit is, very bottom line, based on our current debt management policy, which is $4,709 per account. Based on 20 systems, last 4 systems we have, that translates into $220 million. For FY19, if you look up in the middle part of the slide, our outstanding debt at June 30th is $165 million. We are scheduled to retire $6.8 million, $6.755 million. This slide is actually part of the presentation that we saw back in February. This contemplated that $6 million the impact moving forward to we can take our debt limit to our outstanding debt per capital amount, about $280 million.
Sherry, let's swap this one out, the one he has. Yeah. Let's get another one. We want to make sure you're heard, man.
How's that? Can y'all hear me now? All right. Excellent. Okay, so this shows where our current and projected debt is, assuming we proceeded with Scheme 6 with an immediate funding today. This schedule actually shows debt per capita across the top 25 counties in the state of Tennessee. You can see we've highlighted down there 1342 is where Washington County would be as of February or as of the end of fiscal 18. We didn't have all this came off the comptroller's website, so you don't have all the rest of the numbers from the audits in there. But what I would reference is if you look at the column that's FY17, let me back up. And if you look at what either our debt policy limit or the projected debt per capita is, 1,745 or 1,790, then what I would suggest is that you look in the second column, and that's about where Washington County would end up in relation to its peers, which would put it somewhere in the top, probably in the top 10. All right. Just to remind everybody, this was the school's priority list, which of course is school bus replacements, the annual technology funding that we're providing of $640,000, the Jonesboro building project, which at this point included the purchase of the McCoy property, and then future items that you see on the priority list. And those totaled somewhere in the neighborhood, not counting obviously not counting the school project, we're north of $15 million. Oh, that's funny. Okay. This, if you go to like page 8 of your information, which is a couple of pages down, this was a presentation that we made to HEW, and I don't recall if we actually presented it to the school system or not, but this was back in February of 18, before about half of you came on board. And this was looking at the funding for what was then deemed scheme number 2. That's about as far as what the Board of Education had gotten at this point. And what I wanted to highlight here is Scheme 2 contemplated spending, and if you look down underneath the capital projects expenditures, go down to the Jonesboro K8. I didn't circle it, I should have. It contemplated spending about $26 million for Scheme 2, okay? Well, had we done that last year, it would have required us to borrow about $51 million, which I've highlighted, okay? We would have actually then had to borrow some additional money out in 2020 to fund the capital, their normal capital maintenance, which somewhere in here I point out, they're spending about $3.5 million a year, $3.3 million a year in deferred capital, roofs, HVAC systems, if you look at what we've spent so far. So in some of these projections, when we get into 2021 and going out, I'm using a number closer to $2 million because you'll see that there's really not much planned for years after 2021 or after 2020. But yet we all know that we're going to continue to have capital needs. So you need to keep that in mind. But anyway, the gist of this was that a year ago and a few months, we were looking at adding between 2017 and 2020 close to $98 million to the outstanding debt of Washington County. And then I just got some selected detail in there. You can see what those costs were to do the Scheme 2 at the time, what those projected costs were. You can see we had actually pushed a lot of the capital maintenance into 2020 because we were wanting to try to get that thing started in 2018. So you'll see that, 2020 we're projecting spending almost a little over $6.7 million in the 2020 column. Okay. Before I start through this, I do want to walk you through the different plans, so we'll kind of skip through these real quick. And this is the stuff in this handout. This was the first scheme that came about when we were looking at doing the magnet and then creating the K8. It's kind of, you can see the extension of the Boones Creek the Jonesboro Elementary School back towards Main Street, the bypass or the 11 E's at the top. So this was the schematic that Mr. Street has looked at providing. The cost at that time for the K8, we were looking at about $18 million. And the magnet improvements, which is the existing middle school, would have had cabinetry, re-roofs, finishes, sprinklers, fire alarms, to the tune of about $4.4 million. Well, 4.9 when you factor in all these numbers. So, what that does, that brought us to about $22 million. And at the time, back in 16, coming into 17, they were looking at having about almost 18 million available. And then this was what became Scheme 1, which was to renovate the existing rounds, but still convert the elementary to a K8. And that was adding about 77,000 square feet of space. And you see their cost in there. They did another revision of the existing rounds, which added not 77,000 but 62,000 square feet. They had a cost of an estimated cost of $24 million. And that's the Scheme 2 existing round. And this is where they were actually going to where they had looked at taking out the round part. This scheme actually added 123,000 square feet because you're going to lose some when you take down the round. Again, that his estimate of cost at that time was $28 million. And flip on down here, Scheme 3. Which now, remember these are schemes that were presented to the Board of Education. They haven't come to this body. Scheme 3 was converting the Jonesboro Middle School to a K8, which added Added 62,000 square feet of new space, the light color. And that was a two-story wing behind the middle school, or behind the existing middle school. I think the cost on that at the time was about $17.5 million. And then Mr. Street just had some schematics or, some depictions here of what it would look like. I didn't carve those out. He did change, I guess I should point this out, because on all of these schematics, they are looking at, get back up here to the site plan, or the aerial view of it. But on all of these, it does, you will notice, it does contemplate, which you're going to decide tonight, or I guess, it does contemplate using the McCoy property to create essentially a drive or a stacking lane. So in all of these plans, you will see that McCoy property acquisition, the site work, and the road improvements as a part of those projects. The next one we're going to look at is going to be Then we came up with Scheme 4, which was kind of a modification of Scheme 1 and 2, but it was, again, take down the round portion and actually install some ball fields in the back part of McCoy property. That was adding another 75,000 square feet of new space. Not quite as much as an earlier one. And with the cost being 17, right at 17.5 million. Now that work did not include, although it's depicted on there, the ball field, 17.5 did not depict any costs related to the athletic field. And then they looked at the scheme 5, which again was 75,000 square feet with the price tag of 17.4, 17.5 million. And then I think we're going to get to Scheme 6, which is what you have in front of you, and what we're going to be talking about tonight. Scheme 6 actually adds 64,000 square feet of space, which is the space highlighted in yellow. The existing middle school facility is 67,000 square feet, for those of you that like to look at stuff on a per square foot cost. And so that's the 17,529, or $17,529,000 that we're looking at in the proposed what we'll consider going forward. Okay. So back to the work, this information. Okay, funding model A. What I've done, what I did for the budget committee and you all, was actually try to put together 4 different funding scenarios. Scenario A is going to be moving forward today with doing Scheme 6, based on the architect's cost. Funding B is looking at doing the Scheme 6 3 or 4 years out. Okay. So we'll walk through them, and you can see where we're going with those things. Let me grab this for a minute. I got a couple of notes in here. Okay, so in our funding model A, what we have is the Board of Education's capital list as it stands. We did delete in the funding scenario the $14 million for stadium renovations, which I believe were in 2021 or 2022. This does project having occupancy in the fall of 2021. Again, like I said a moment ago, it's based on the 2017 construction cost estimates. The debt is amortized over 20 years at 4%. The school buses, we had shown in some earlier scenarios, we had shown school buses being replaced in some years at $800,000 or $900,000. For sake of trying to keep apples to apples, we'll replace those school buses based on the pennies that we actually take in for the 2 pennies for the school bus that's in the capital projects fund, which amounts to about $610,000 a year. And then, as I told you a few minutes ago, over the 5-year actual expenses on capital maintenance needs, total average is about $3.3 million. So, but then it stops in 2021. So what I've done is continued it on out. Think of it as a contingency of $2 million a year for capital maintenance. It really doesn't have any bearing until you get into, funding something out in 2023, 24, 25. But this is where we are today. You can see the first column is the total of what we've actually projected and or what we've actually spent plus our projections. The next 2 columns are what we actually spent or committed to in 2017 and 2018. The third column, of course, is the projection. The fourth column is the fourth column is, essentially fiscal 2020 and on. And, we wouldn't, at this point in time, we're in fiscal 19, so there's really not any way to start this project within this year. We might be able to borrow the money earlier and borrow it in 2019, but I'm showing it as being actually borrowed the first of 2020, the $56 million. And the objective on the way these models work is at the very bottom is how much cash is in the capital projects fund for school purposes. If it turns red, that's where we're upside down. We've got to figure out another way to fund it. That's where you have a deficit. So we've talked about this one a lot, in terms of it requiring the $57 million based on the 2017 cost. And then these are just the details that make up the number. Here you can see the Boones Creek, the cost for the Boones Creek project, and what we actually borrowed for that. And of course, at the very top, another thing that y'all need to be aware of is we've got, although the pennies aren't specifically allocated to each of those projects, we've got a lump sum number of pennies that come into the capital projects plan. For sake of, just answering questions about where are the pennies, etc., this shows how those pennies are being allocated. If we didn't borrow, since we didn't borrow the full Boones Creek amount, we won't have to use all 14 pennies to fund that debt, or to pay twice the cost, because when we borrow it, we've got to double what we're borrowing. Okay, so that's what uses up the pennies. If we don't have to borrow it, we can use those remaining pennies to fund other projects with cash. This was, like I said, this was the Boones Creek project. Jonesboro, this is where we're going, and this is using $20,750,000, which is what the commission, a prior commission, had actually earmarked for the project. And then I'm not going to go through all the rest of this detail. I will point out that we've got we may get some relief, some pressure relief. If you'll notice on this slide, the 4th line and the 6th or 7th line, Crockett HVAC controls and Boone HVAC controls. It may be if the energy systems project that the board's considering comes to fruition, where they can pay for those improvements out of operational savings, energy savings, you know, we may have some relief on pressure to fund those HVAC controls and whatnot, but
We still will have to borrow the money up front.
yeah, the commission will still have to borrow the money. It would be treated as a rural school debt, so that, because those funds would be paid for from the school's operating funds.
Not double.
Not doubled, but in order for them to have $1 to pay out of their operating funds, there would have had to been $2 to go into education somewhere, because it is split between the city and Washington County. Sure. Yep. Okay. Hmm? You're having to fund all those other capital, you're having to fund all those other cash needs. You could, Commissioner, I could have probably split it out between capital projects borrowing, bus borrowing, additional Boones Creek borrowing, and gotten to it would have come to the same number.
I have a hard time seeing.
I will. We will send this out in the full-size PDF tomorrow morning. Okay. Well, it would be funding. If you look down on the go down that column, you see $7,180,000 for capital, other school capital and technology. That's got to be borrowed, because there's not enough cash there to fund that, or there won't be in the subsequent year. So you've got to double. You're essentially doubling those cash outlays that you're making for those other categories. That would cover all the expected expenditures through 2021. Because 2021 is where we go negative. So for everything that we're going to spend in 2020 and 2021, whether it's for Jonesboro, whether it's for Boones Creek, whether it's for other capital maintenance, those spends are having to be borrowed in 2020, net of what we project to collect for those two. We're going to collect $2 million a year in revenue. Okay, property tax current year, you're looking at $2 million of revenue coming in 2020, $2 million coming in 2021. Well, you've got 19. If you look at the expenditure projections, that's way in excess of the $2 million. So you've got to borrow enough to cover all your capital project spending, unless you just want to cannibalize your capital project plan and not do anything else, which you could do.
What does spike that it spikes up to 7.1 and 4.5 those 2 years?
Yeah, if you'll flip back about 4 more, well, probably two or three pages in your double list, and I do apologize for it being so small. 2020, the $7 million.
Oh, okay, I see the breakup. Yeah.
That's where we're doing the Boone Road, the Crockett Road, the Crockett HVAC control, Boone Road, Crockett control. What this schedule represents is where we would end up current outstanding debt. Okay? And, over the last couple of years, we've tried to target retiring all that debt at 2037 or 2038. All 20-year debt. So you can see the blue line rolling off. Borrowing $57 million is the orange line. What that really takes debt. Now, we've still got it on 20-year term, so, you know, it gets out there to 2039 before it's all completely paid off. Paid the last bit of principal in 2038. Yeah, I had that number on an earlier slide. I don't think it's quite as.
Looks like it's gonna be close.
This is the thing that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because this is the interest cost. Okay? And so what we've got, what this,
214.
yeah, $214 million, and then our cap would be like 220. This is the interest cost. This is what we pay, or the taxpayers pay, to do stuff today rather than waiting till later to do it. It's, you know, that's what borrowing's all about to a large extent. So you can see what happens to that net interest cost. It goes from, right now we're right at about $6 million a year, which will continue to decline if we don't borrow anything for the next 20 years, which isn't realistic, but you know, it will continue to decline. But when we pull the trigger on $57 million, that $6 million is going to become almost $8 million. So you're going to add $2 million of interest cost to your annual appropriations. This shows what the actual debt service would be. This is the actual amount we pay each year in principal and interest. Right now we're right at about $12 million. It drops a little bit out there in 2027 under the blue line, and of course that stays flat. That's total debt service, because as we pay more principal, or excuse me, as we pay more on the principal, our interest decreases, so we're able to pay more on principal the next year. So we keep our debt service level. Is what we try to do. So we're not having spikes year in and year out on what we need to fund. Okay. Got this model, and I'm just going to give you the highlights of it and then show you the big picture of what it actually does. Yes, sir, Freddie.
Well, before you transition, I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page in terms of, so the only expenditures that you're proposing on these projections are all school related. So it assumes no spending out of the capital projects account apart and separate for schools. Is that correct?
Ask that again. This represents total debt service for the county.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about your graphs. I'm coming back to the cash flow page.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's just school. That's all school.
So this doesn't assume we spend any money for capital projects for something else.
Correct.
Water lines, sewer lines.
That's correct. That's correct.
I mean, so it's quite likely that there will be other capital money spent that we would want to do so out of the projects account and not just out of the general fund.
Correct.
And that connects to my question. I noticed that there's funding for some things in the old capital structure. Like,
well, if you go back on this, I don't think you're going to see any. In here, there's not anything on the school's capital plan for. There is a Boones Creek elementary roof for the old elementary. Yes,
and
ma'am.
that's the school that we're looking at.
Correct.
That would fall under
Well,
We don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know yet.
yeah, what that total, I mean, if the school system were to move the elementary school to the county, then the $925 that's on here would not be an educational expenditure, not subject to not subject to sharing, we'd end up funding it out of the county capital project or general fund. So, if it's $900,000 to do it, how much more if it takes any more, I don't know.
So that's the idea that you don't have one firm for any project.
Yeah, just the acknowledgement that there's likely to be capital expenditures that we would want to make out of the capital projects account, apart and separate from schools, whether it's water lines or something for fire protection, et cetera. All that is assumed here is capital spending for schools.
And the TCAP is not a school expense.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, no, I don't think the schools will have any involvement in the operation or funding or anything. So I don't think it's a burden for the Board of Education. Okay. All right.
I can't see this very well.
I can't either.
$6 million, you're saying that we're going to borrow in 2020, that's theory, it's never been approved. These projects you're talking about, when these projects are, one breakdown, that's something the commission would have to approve at some point in time. So we're just, I guess, anticipate that we want to do it.
Well, to answer, yes, because, if we're not going to put a roof on Crockett, or if we're not going to do HVAC controls, if we're not going to spend any money in capital, you may not spend anything else. That's correct. And it wouldn't take $56 million. This model is to be able to meet all the school board's priorities. If you'll flip back to about the second page, pages, it's the second page, in the very second page, right here, Commissioner. Yep, flip it around, right there. Those two schedules. They've got $7.6 million in FY 1920, $5.5 million in 2021, and then $10 to $14 million for stadium renovations in 21-22.
So that scenario takes the stadium out, but it does contemplate the 13,180 for those projects on those two pages.
Yeah, so there's $13 million worth of.
You're basing on just whatever the school board asked the board, you're going ahead and putting in as is it was approved by the commission.
No, not as approved, but so that you would see what the impact would be should you move forward with all of it. Yeah. None of it. Well, that's what y'all are deliberating. You're right. I'm just trying to give you a model.
That's the same way we've been looking at capital project plan.
Yes.
With requests for their wish list for the lack of better word, on it every time it's looking at it.
Yep.
This model is what I look looking forward and glance ahead. You got A, B, C, and D. Since some of these other models are less borrowing, different time schedules, but
Correct.
we're going to look at things that are going to show this in a little better light as we go through.
Correct. Right. Yep. Trying to get there.
Well, for example, JD. $2 million, because you got to double whatever those expenditures are in terms of debt. You may not do. Right. Well, if you have
well, I'm sorry about that. There's a lot of numbers floating around, and these are models, and, at the end of the day, what it is that the commission's got to decide is how much debt do they want to take on ultimately.
So another large number on there is boiler replacement at Davy Crockett. And so we know during the winter this year, that boiler has failed and likely will be replaced this summer. So while these are estimates of potential future needs, some of them are already showing up as reality. I mean, it's just, we don't really know for sure, but we do know that about $3.5 million a year is what we've spent over the last 5 years just in basic fixing things.
One thing I would, Commissioner, the numbers in here are all, there's nothing set in stone. For example, and we'll talk about it at the very end, but the Jonesboro Scheme 6 project, okay, is total project's what, 20 million? 17.5 million in construction costs. Those were based on 2 years ago. I'd hazard to guess that it's probably anywhere from 20 to 30% higher today. So, yeah, we may take out a $925,000 roof, but then you're going to have some significant inflation that's going to come back into your construction cost.
So, Mitch, what you're telling us is we don't have to really fund any of those capital projects, right? We can just move all those pennies over to build a Jonesboro school and
Do what you want, yeah.
We have that option.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we move forward, that's something we may want to consider when you look at the school's priority list of those capital needs. We can shift pennies there, correct, Mitch?
Sure. Yeah.
So that is an option for this commission to do.
Okay, let's go to where we were trying to get to a minute ago after we looked at the debt schedules. Page 21, let's look at Model B real quick. Now this one does factor in a 30% increase in construction cost. It defers the opening of Scheme 6 until fall of 2028. And again, it does eliminate the $14 million in athletic stadium renovations that is on the school board's priority list. And we are, and by pushing it out to 2028, you will see that this could essentially be done without any borrowing. Barring anything outside of the $2 million estimate that I provided for you earlier in terms of contingency for capital, this model puts occupancy in 2028 at not having to borrow a nickel. So it does depend, as Chairman Matherly alluded to a minute ago, when you do these projects. That's very important. Now, unless somebody wants to drill through these numbers, I'd like to go ahead and skip away to Model C, funding Model C real quick, which is on page 28, 3. This one actually puts them in Scheme 6 in fall of 2023. Okay, but it does take and move, just so you kind of see the impact of moving the Boone and the Boone roof and the Crockett controls to a later year. The specific details here. Again, we eliminate their $14 million stadium renovations. We do the Jonesboro Middle School roof in 2020. The Boone roof and the Crockett controls get deferred until 2022. And again, I'm looking at funding model C. The Jonesboro Scheme 6, which does include the McCoy property, has a projected occupancy in 2023. And again, the costs are just based on 2017 numbers. So, you know, there may be a little upward pressure there to get to current construction costs. Again, the debt, you'll see, is going to be 20-year at 4%. School buses, same thing I mentioned earlier, and adding a $2 million contingency for capital maintenance in 2023 and later. But if you look at this, when we're putting them in there in the fall of 2023, well, that's going to require borrowing in 2022 of almost $52 million. You save a little bit by the amount of those. Essentially, the difference is what you're saving is moving those controls and that Crockett roof, Boone roof and Crockett controls to 2022, and not doing those quite as early, which allows you to accumulate some pennies a little quicker, which reduces the amount of borrowing that you've got to take on. Now, let's move on to D, and that's kind of, yeah.
One of the reasons you're showing that shows that the capital project fund balance also does not go negative except for that 2 years.
Yeah, those couple little, correct.
So we're not having to make up for those as well.
Right, that's correct. Try to keep this thing in some kind of equilibrium. Yeah. Okay. Now, if we look at Model D, now this is again using their priority list with eliminating the stadium renovations and eliminating the HVAC and the controls upgrades, as those may come through from their energy savings. But it defers occupancy of the middle school until fall of 2028, which is another, nine years of classes of kids going to school. So what so what I did here, just to show you where it ended up, is that if you decided to postpone it that long, then what do you do today for those kids? Well, that's what this was trying to get at. It does exclude the McCoy property. On this page right here, it says fall of 2026. That should be 2028. That's a typo that I wasn't able to fix once we got it into the PDF. But the costs are accelerated by 30% or increased by 30%. Again, we're going to do 20-year debt. School buses the same, and then the $2 million. But where this one ends up, and if you'll look in the 2020 column, okay, which is next fiscal year, that's where we do, and Commissioner Harris, their cost of doing the renovations to the elementary and the middle school were projected at $9.9 million 2 years ago. I just plugged in $11 million. I don't know if it's $11 million. I don't know if it's $13 million. But to kind of get us in the ballpark, or $9 million, to get us in the ballpark, if you made those immediate renovations to the Boones Creek, or the Jonesboro Elementary and the Jonesboro Middle School that were originally contemplated, you will end up having to borrow about $26 million, which is about what the original plan projected would happen had we done it 2 years ago. So this kind of takes you to the point of, and then if you look further out, you'll see that we do get a new school in 2028, again at no borrowing, if that was what some future commission and Board of Education wanted to do.
Mitch, with the pennies,
we're talking 2028. This is 2019 going into 2020, and what we decide ought to fit the terms of the school board and the commission, because we can't determine what the next group of elected officials are going to think.
And if that's if that's the approach, then that takes you to borrowing in 2020 $57 million to do all that, because this is what the school is wanting to do.
Not that I like the idea of waiting until 2028, but what is our ability to hold another commission or financial group future council to plan that has this kind of suggestions?
I defer to the legal beagles, but I don't think that you can do that. I mean, I don't think that there's a, the only way you can commit something is to borrow the money.
So we come up with a plan that then later than now, then this would be the
Correct. Exactly. Yep. Now, what, again, if this Model D, then I went ahead and showed what this would look like compared, what it would do to your outstanding debt. And this is what, you'd match up with the first set of graphs, what it does to your interest expense, which is a little less, and then what it does to your total interest would be a little south of $7 million as opposed to $8 million. And debt service would be, as opposed to being about $18 million, it would be closer to, what's that, about $15 million, 15 and a half. So I know there's a lot of numbers, a lot of stuff. Yeah, Phil had his up first. Okay.
Mitch, what do you project in a cash position for June 30th?
Oh, Lord. Oh, man. Total county cash or capital projects cash? Oh, gosh. Where's Rick? When you need him. 40 million, maybe? 30, $40 million? Yeah. Yeah. But that's, that's total county cash. We do, but that's total county cash. School cash, highway fund cash, debt service cash. I mean, that's total cash. Okay, Kid.
I guess one of the places I keep there is like I myself. I remember sitting out there that night, county commission raised taxes 40 cents. I remember what was said that we were going to do Fulton Creek, we're going to renovate the Jonesboro School up to, I guess, this $20 million figure. I guess.
10. It was 10 million.
9.8.
$9.9 million of cost, which would have required us to borrow a little over $20 million. Not a $20 million project.
So what happens between now and then who is so far off course to do that now?
An election. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, well, no, because.
You're in the same position you were in.
No, sir, I wasn't. When we passed, and I don't know if I'll speak from my old commissioner hat, when we passed the 40-cent tax increase, that was to fund $10 million of improvements at the Jonesboro Elementary and Middle School, period. Okay? As far as Jonesboro is concerned. What happened was that you had a new director of schools and a thing called the Washington Way that came along. And the Washington Way was based on an academic magnet in the Jonesboro Middle School. Okay, that academic magnet is something that I don't know that there's one in Northeast Tennessee. There's a STEM school in Kingsport, but there's not a magnet. Mr. Patrick, we looked at moving maintenance items further out the timeline. So when we move $6 million worth of maintenance items, we free up $12 million of having to borrow. Okay? So that's what took the the 20 million, that's what took the 10 million. That's the way we were able to go from $10 million for the middle and the elementary school to the 20,750,000. It would have been a very big struggle for you all had that occurred. But the academic magnet was the critical component of making that move forward. School board decided they didn't want to do a magnet. Yes, and that's exactly what D is.
Yeah, Nick, I would just say, Commissioner, the answer to your question is really nothing has changed, other than the price of construction is probably higher today than it used to be. The funding is in place already from that tax increase to support almost about a $20 million borrow, which is exactly $10 million double that we contemplated at the request of the Board of Education back from 2016. So you're exactly right. It really hasn't a thing changed other than the cost of construction has gone up and the cost of borrowing money's gone up. But you saw as we started the presentation tonight, from 2016 until last October, all of the different innovations that the Board of Education had contemplated in terms of projects on that site, none of which were at the $9.8 million level that the Commission funded with that tax increase.
Yeah. Right. Well, it could have been $20 million of borrowing. It would have been $20 million of borrowing, not $20 million of spend. Pardon me?
Was not that 5 cents that's allocated for Jonesboro? Was that money not used for Boones Creek project? Is that not part of the problem?
No.
Not part of the problem.
No, it's not part of the problem.
But I was correct, though, right? That was used for Boones Creek project.
We think of it like this, Mike. I mean, we received 5 pennies for Boones Creek, or 14 for Boones Creek, 5 for Jonesboro, 2 for the buses, 5 for capital maintenance. Those dollars all go into the capital projects fund.
Right.
Okay? We don't take and set aside those 5 pennies, that $1.3 million for Jonesboro, and go borrow more money to make Boones Creek work.
But my question is, why do we, if we set aside that, why would we use that money for another project?
Why would we?
Yeah.
So that we don't have to borrow for it.
We're talking $56 million right now.
But had we not done it this way, instead of borrowing, if you'll go back to your first, let me take you guys back here. I mean, this is important to understand. If you'll go to one of those summary sheets where it lists, where it shows whether you got red or not, well, if you'll look in the actual 2017 column, okay, we borrowed $16 million for Boones Creek, okay? Well, if we'd done it the traditional way, and that's what you're alluding to, the Boones Creek project's 28 million, we would have had to borrow $56 million because we've got to split it.
It's just flipped opposite, though, the way I'm understanding it. I maybe just...
No, there is some truth to that.
When we use that money, it's just flipped back. It's just opposite, right, correct?
Well, I mean, that's partially correct. I mean, we're taking and using, had we done this in the traditional way, okay, we would have had no pennies coming in. We would have not created a savings account. So we would have had to borrow the full amount to fund the Boones Creek project. And when you borrow it, you have to double it. Which would have used up more pennies to fund the debt service. So, I mean, it is complicated, but it tries to get us to reduce the cost of the taxpayers is what it's doing.
And the 5 pennies for the Jonesboro project still exist, and those 5 pennies still will support the debt service for borrowing the 18 to $20 million that was originally requested by the Board of Education. Those pennies are still there, and they'll still support that amount of borrowing.
And that would be roughly a $9 to $10 million project.
Correct.
Every time we say
That's right.
20, we need to make that clear that we're not talking about $20 million.
Yeah, the nickel would support about $20 million of debt. So however,
$10 million
which is a $10 million project.
So to make sure that I'm essentially on the right page, and I know the question was asked, well, what's changed, but Model D is you've kind of modeled it out for us, and I know you're here with information. You're not necessarily advocating for a particular model of one over the other, but Model D most closely represents what was imagined 2.5 years ago when the tax increase occurred.
Correct. I will say this. I will advocate for the most financially prudent model, okay?
And I think the other thing, as I understand it, what's changed was at that time, a project in Jonesboro, just say slightly under 10 million, was what was imagined, whereas now the project at Jonesboro is now imagined more like 21 million. So in terms of what has changed, the request as it is coming from the school board is double what it originally was.
When the tax increase was initiated, you're absolutely correct. And going back to the 20 million, and this, again, you know, you need to be, I think you all need to be cognizant of this, whether or not, you know, that construction can happen for 17.5 and the total project of 20,750,000. Construction costs are probably closer to $225 to $250 a foot today for new construction. What I've done is and this is purely a projection of what the cost might be. Our costs we're dealing with are 2 years old, okay? So what we've tried to do here is ratchet in what those costs might look like if we go to the market today. You know, you can't take it as gospel, but I think it's important to consider, because I don't think you're going to be able to do the project for $20,750,000 based on 2017 numbers, and that's what it's based on. Now, you might scale it down, you might make it fit, but you're not going to do the same project. So if you use current construction cost, increasing the site work, you know, there's $3.4 million for the site and the driveway back to Main Street. If you increase that by 20%, factor in the architect and construction management fee, add in a 5% contingency, you've got a $30 million project. So it'll be somewhere between 20 million and 30 million if the scope of the project stays the same. Correct. Say that again? That's correct. All right. Those do require some deferred occupancy of AKA. That's correct. They could do it. They could not. That's correct. You got 3 years to decide.
The only plan we ever considered the next 3 years.
No, I don't know about that. No, I think you have control over how much you're going to fund. Once you fund it, you can't tell the committee, you can't tell the Board of Education what to do with it. But you do have the ability to, if you don't like the project, or you want to see a different project, or you want to move forward with it, that's what you have the ability to do. Yeah, go back. Yeah, you can't, you're right, Commissioner Edens, you're right. You can't tell you can't make the Board of Education do an $11 million renovation in 2020. That's correct. You can't do that.
Would you repeat that?
And realistically, what's before us is the question of whether the funds.
Correct.
That was the Board of Education voted to arrange this body to request money. So,
which is what happened at Booth Creek.
That is A, is probably going to the actual accomplished plan six. And you can see that plan C, by waiting a few years, you know, the estimated borrowing, dropped from 56 million to 51 million.
That's what I was getting at. B and C would have to be funded by the base.
You get B and six, yeah.
To get a K-8.
So, D, is one that actually more closely, forget about what happens in 2028. It mimics more closely what was originally contemplated about Board of Education and requesting this body fund. So look at just the first part of that, the renovation at $11 million, $26 million fund. That's probably the closest financial model we have for originally requested. And then because the intent was always to come back and build something different again.
Understanding that, you know, what's in front of the commission and working its way through the commission is the Scheme 6 question. But part of the problem that we've had and the reason that we're requested that we do this tonight was to try to get everybody on the same page because there's so many numbers floating around and so much concern about what wasn't correct and trying to get the bottom line, which is one reason we suggested school board members be here to hear this. But would it be prudent at this point to sit down together with the school board after, we didn't need to do that tonight, we need to hear this tonight, but to sit down with them and talk about where we go from here, because, for instance, if we were talking about putting off Scheme 6, especially into a future board's term, where it will ultimately be that board of education and that commission's decision, would it be the time to sit back down and talk with everybody understanding where we are, what it means if we do stretch something like that out, to sit back down and talk about what, because they may change what their request is based on what they see funding on.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And what you said is, what we understood was that the body wanted to see some different financial model of how to get to significant projects because looking out over time, realizing 2028 this body has to support projects. So what you're saying probably correct. At this point in time, experts in the budget committee will once again take up funding specifics with all this information and other information that body might want to request in addition to this, which is fair game. And then it will move to the full committee. I think that was a request to the study committee. And the budget committee would consider it along with some alternatives. It would be as the option to no recommendation, that is fund or recommend that nothing. That's certainly pretty, or just pass it on up to the commission. But I think it was the HEW request and the budget committee's belief that also it should go to the full commission for consideration. It's a significant request and will impact the county further for the next 20 years. So that's sort of where we are. And then after that, whatever the outcome, obviously I think we need to get Board of Education come to some conclusion.
Mitch, if you were a school board member sitting out here in the audience tonight.
He is.
No, he's not sitting in the audience, Mayor.
I'm up
He's
here.
correcting me first thing tonight.
Don't put me on the spot now.
Would you be assuming that we had $10 million available for a project to be looking at today?
For Jonesboro?
Yes.
Yes.
All bars.
Yes.
Bars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 10 million, but we'd have to understand that we've got to borrow it to get.
It would be all borrowed.
Yeah, I understand that.
There'd be $20 million. It'd be
Yeah.
a split,
Right.
and you'd have $10 million available for a project.
Correct.
Okay.
I understand that.
Okay. Well, there's been a lot of questions about how much money there was available for a project,
Right.
and I've heard many different numbers. And I think that's one of the reasons we all wanted to get it together here tonight and we left here, we had a clear understanding of what was available tonight, and I think that's the first step in moving forward, is both of us understanding where we are and how much we have to put towards a project.
That's what those 5 pennies are for. That's exactly.
Now,
In fairness to your fellow board members,
Yeah.
you're knee deep in these numbers all the time. Do you think that's what they anticipate?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for, I can't speak for 8 others. I mean, that's my understanding. You know, I see that as a minimum amount that would be available, not a maximum though. I think there could be more made available.
So what you're saying is we don't
But-
have that money available, we have that much borrowing capacity, is what you're saying.
Correct. We've got, whatever we do, we've got to borrow at this point.
I want to make sure we don't have that money available.
Correct. Whatever we do, we borrow it from this point going forward for several years.
And that's always been the plan.
That's always been the plan. Yes. Yes. Exactly.
if you, go ahead, Commissioner Malone.
Well, I was just trying to refresh or go back through the various models, and maybe I am missing it, and maybe here, but did you kind of touch on the tax implications for each scenario or each model, such that Model A clearly would require a tax increase now? Model B, no. Model C, yes. Model D, no. Is that
We could pull that. I don't have that together here.
but,
It's not in there.
I mean, Model A would require a property tax increase.
Correct. And the reason why it would is that it would take, assuming you're going to continue with capital projects funding, okay, you would need to replace some of those pennies.
And that's
With
where
the-
we see the red on the
Correct.
cash flow projection. We would essentially have to do a tax increase in an amount sufficient that would cover that red if we were to continue with those planned capital projects.
Correct. That's correct.
But is it safe then to say, I think I'm saying it a different way, but Model D, funding a project in the $10 to $11 million price range, Model D does not require a property tax increase.
That is correct.
Thank you.
That is correct.
Model, which one?
D,
D.
the last one, does
Yeah,
not require.
If you ignore
We already-
2028 piece of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Correct.
Susie has indicated that can be for a next commission and they can raise taxes.
But we have to remember, when you use any of that capital money and commit that to debt service, in borrowing, those pennies are never coming back to the capital fund.
That's correct.
So then, in a year or two, when somebody needs a roof, you know, how are you going to pay for that roof?
Well, and that's where
That
the
HVAC system, you know, we've got into that situation before of how do you pay for those things?
Well-
And buses and those things.
And that's what the $10 million Jonesboro project, Model D, actually provides for. It does protect dollars to take care of those future capital needs.
So it does take care of our future
Right.
capital needs,
Right.
but it still limits us to the $10 million that we had, project.
Pretty good, approximately.
And if,
Without it touching the tax rate. That's correct. Right.
if you moved, like in the capital projects fund, Mitch, let's say you needed 2 more pennies out of that side to move over to the Jonesboro project. Could you cut 2 pennies worth out of that?
And you're saying using 7 pennies as opposed to 5? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I think you could do that.
But that would also deplete some of your capital
That's
needs,
correct.
and there'd be a new priority list at
Correct.
that time.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I would think.
So there is some wiggle room in there.
Correct.
But it would be what the school board would be willing to give up on their priority list, or, is that correct?
To some- Correct.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mitch.
Okay. Let me get through the rest of this because I've taken a little over an hour of your time and I don't want to. Okay, we talked about this. Just big picture thing. Again, you know, we've got, when Kimley Horn, and you'll find this on page 13 or 14 in the Kimley Horn study, the projections that drove all this was projecting us to have 9,500 students in 2022, 2023. Last year we were at a little south of 8,400. Okay, so you know, I think as a prudent financial manager, I think it's important for you to look at where your school system's going when you start talking about adding capacity. Okay? And that does it.
You know, going back to this first, I guess this is a summary architecture concept.
Yes, sir.
This first phase is, this book usually done. It's total about approved by county commission 2037,000. Right. This is 2017. So that's split, or that just
That was for the Washington Way. There's your academic magnets, you confer with the
this, I think, for the original tax increase from
No.
I guess this is where
There was 10 million in the original tax.
where was this coming from then?
Pushing stuff out. Pushing stuff out, defer that every week.
Why are we so all on this number from the school system? Somebody, forget one, pretty close number on all its schemes, but we're doing on the world, but communication, that's it, why was all the people on all these schemes, 17, 18, 19 million dollars, I don't understand why. Was there a miscommunication or what was going on?
I think that is what, and I tried to explain this a minute ago, it's when the Board of Education and the Commission went to not renovating Jonesboro Elementary and Jonesboro Middle, but to the Washington Way, which was a new academic magnet and the creation of a K-8, okay? That's where the additional cost came from to do that project, okay? And so what's happened is that the academic magnet has gone away, and so we're just trying to create a K-8.
At some point in time, the commission vote, say we're going to give them 20 million.
Yeah, there's a resolution for an academic magnet and a K-8 on the Jonesboro Elementary School.
School system takes it off and then we pay for both. Look at the Jonesboro school. Originally, was this within the old ordinance?
I'd have to go back and look at the pro formas on that, but probably pretty close. Not quite 40, probably in the 30s.
At that point in time, were we capable of funding this without tax?
I'd have to go back and look at those proposals.
Have some of the capital projects that were going to be pushed off to make that Washington Way work, have some of those now taken place? Or in the
Probably
process?
some of them, but the big ones was like the Boone Roof, and the ones that'll have a significant impact, you know, where you're talking about $1 million project or more, those we're still contending with. South Central Roof might have been one that we may have extended out. I'd have to go back and look, Commissioner Williams.
How far, do you remember, you may not remember this, but how far out were they pushed to make Washington Way work?
They were pushed till Washington Way would start fairly quickly, so they would be pushed to, you know, like a couple of years after Washington Way was complete. I mean, we were pushing them for 4 or 5 years.
But there again, we go back to talking about pennies again. If you're borrowing those pennies and,
Right.
and committing those to debt service, those pennies are never returning back to the capital fund project.
They don't go in the piggy bank
As
anymore.
you push these things out, I mean, you can pay for them with cash, but you know, once we commit this to debt service, those pennies are gone and they're not coming back. So, you know, I have a concern about committing all this capital fund pennies to debt service. So, and I think that's something that we'll just have to be careful of, because how many projects, what do we have right now funding the capital projects of the schools, the priority list of the schools? 7 pennies, Mitch?
13.
How many, Mayor?
13.
13 pennies there in that
Sorry, $13 million on the project.
in the priority list.
Yes, sir.
That's being funded with essentially 5 pennies,
5 pennies.
which includes 600, right.
So if you moved all 5 of those pennies and put those 5 with your other Jonesboro pennies, that would give you 10 pennies, correct?
Right.
And you would commit those 10 pennies to debt service, but how do you pay for anything else, is the question.
Yeah,
Can you commit 3.5?
the 5 pennies is half of what they really need. They need 8 to 10 for ongoing capital maintenance.
Right. All right. Mitchie, the school board members have been here this evening. I appreciate them coming, and they might have a question or two. I'd hate for them to come and not get to ask a question. Is there any objection to the school board members asking a question here tonight? Chairman Irwin, would you have a question that you'd like to ask while we're here? If you want to, you can come on up to the podium.
$23,750. Is that what that number was? $23,750 for the Jonesboro project. What I'd like to know is, we paid cash on Boones Creek project. I took over chairmanship in September. Right after September, we had you all to come in and ask questions about funding and everything, and they said that Mitch told us that we paid $19.5 million cash on the project at Boones Creek. Okay? When we started this school project, they said it was going to take 14 pennies to build Boones Creek. Well, as of September till now, I'd like to know the figure how much we paid cash on that project at Boones Creek. I don't know how much more that 19 million is grown. And if we paid cash and they said it was going to take 14 pennies to build it or to fund it, how much is them 14 pennies freed up? How many of them pennies has been freed up? That could go towards Jonesboro project. Now, I don't want my taxes raised. I'm the first one. I can't afford them now. But that's the kind of questions that I'd like to know. How much is it freed up, and how much can be put towards? I understand the borrowing. I understand, and paying cash is good. I know legislative, they've been talking, Johnson City's wanting their money, and nobody said anything about that. So, really need to get that in your thoughts. So, but that's, we finally come together as a board with Scheme 6. It's took us a while, but we come to the board with Scheme 6. You all are our funding body. Try to fund it.
Thank you. Mitch, wasn't there in your projections recently I saw where several pennies of that Boones Creek money would be freed up? Wasn't there a year in there that it was 7 cents or something that we saw?
Right.
When was that, Mitch?
What year was that?
Was that? I know it's several years out.
Actually, if we were to proceed with Scheme 6, those pennies would go away in 2020.
2020.
next fiscal year, assuming we borrow, assuming we went ahead and made the borrow. Those pennies go away as do the Jonesboro pennies.
Where do they show back up in here?
They'll go to debt service.
They go to debt service.
You'll have 14,
Yeah, they'll go
you'll have
back to debt
14
service.
plus pennies going to debt service.
Have we committed all 14 pennies from Boones Creek now? I mean, like Mr. Irvin talked about, do we have any extra pennies at Boones Creek that we will not use because we paid cash for it?
Other than the 14 that didn't get 14. No, I'm sorry. We have already. We've moved 5. We had to move
Okay.
5 pennies over from the 14 to fund the debt service we did last year.
Okay.
Okay, the $16 million, $17 million of borrowing. So we moved 5 pennies. That left 9
Okay.
pennies left on the Jonesboro project. It will use all of the 9 and the 5 for the Jonesboro project.
So,
And then, and probably then some to be able to fund the deferred capital.
so we'll have 9 pennies left from Boones Creek that we won't commit to debt service, correct?
Unless we go borrow some money. I
Do
mean,
we-
right now, that's correct. Right now, we have 9 pennies that that are going into the capital project fund to pay for to make your down payment, if you will, on the Jonesboro School, okay? Once we borrow, those 9 pennies now go to debt service.
Okay. So we're going to use 9 pennies from Boones Creek for Jonesboro, correct?
Correct. And that's all that's left in there. Those
Okay.
9 go away.
Mitch, if you're looking at Model D, the 8 pennies for, say, at Boones Creek, clear on out through 2028, why are those still showing up there?
Because let me get that page so I can answer it. Those are staying there because we're only borrowing 26 million, not 57 million. Okay, so we take all 5 pennies from Jonesboro and take an additional penny from Boones Creek.
So does that mean those are,
What that means is that you still have 15 pennies ending up in the capital projects plan to be able to fund,
they're generating cash?
generating cash to be able to fund any school-related capital, school improvements, athletic stadiums later on.
And they're just staying up there because they haven't been allocated to something else?
Yeah, we haven't borrowed.
Not that we're spending 8 pennies on Boones Creek still. each
Correct.
year.
We haven't borrowed any money for anything else that we have to reallocate them to. Yeah.
Or allocated it to something else like capital and technology buses or some other.
Well, those pennies generate dollars, okay?
Right.
You know, the 8 pennies is gonna generate, $2 million, a little over $2 million. That $2 million goes into the capital projects fund. That cash is then used to pay for the technology, to pay for the capital maintenance. I mean, they
So-
all flow into one bucket. We don't put them in separate pots, because if we did that, then we'd be borrowing essentially 100% for each specific project, other than what we had specifically earmarked.
Those $13 million worth of projects that have been identified aren't designed to go in 1 year. They're staggered out.
2 years.
Yeah, so that the pennies, will pay for those cash not borrow for that. Unless we, load up and do the goes for a school and that has to be included as part of the project. Or you don't do any of that.
So I think, Mitch, I have another follow-up question, just so we can get our heads wrapped around these pennies. So in Boones Creek, we'll have 9 pennies left over, correct?
We've got, that's correct. We've got 8 right now. I mean 9 right now, yes.
Okay, that's at Boones Creek. Jonesboro has 5 pennies, correct?
Yes, sir.
The renovation project, correct? We'll call it renovation project. And the next one, we have our capital projects fund where our priority list is.
correct.
Does it have a committed amount of pennies, Mitch,
Well, we're collecting 5 pennies for that.
for that?
Correct.
All right. So you don't think Boones Creek will use that's all Boones Creek will use is how many? Will they use all 9 for borrowing at Boones Creek?
No, we're not. No, because we're not going to borrow anymore at Boones Creek.
Okay.
Now, if we borrow for Jonesboro, we borrow for a roof or boiler system or something like that,
Yeah.
then we'll need some pennies.
Well, let me ask you this question.
Those are on your general fund side.
My question is,
The 14 pennies originally contemplated that. I mean, that's where the 14 pennies came. The funding model included the athletic facilities inside this education component.
that's 19 pennies
Yes, sir.
altogether.
Correct.
Today, how many pennies do we have funding the priority list of the school board?
5.
5. And that's what we're seeing on the paper,
Correct. And
our breakdown. All right,
it's about half of what it should be.
okay. So is that why we're using that initial 9 cents
It helps to offset those.
offset?
Mm-hmm.
Because their priority list can't be funded by 5, is that correct?
Yeah, if you look, 5 pennies will generate $1.5 million a year. So for 2 years, that's $3 million. They've got $7 million on their priority list.
Is that for when, this year?
The next 2 years, 2020 and 2021.
So that's really 19 cents.
Okay.
So, and there again, me and you, going back to the same thing we talked about. It depends on what's on the priority list and what the school building needs are. But there's 19 cents really available. It's just how you prioritize it, whether it's a school, whether it's a roof, whether it's your priority list. Isn't that correct?
That's what you all are doing. That's
Thank-
correct. How do y'all want to
Thank
split
you.
up those 19 pennies?
Thank you very much. I appreciate you covering that, clearing that up before we leave here tonight.
Anybody else?
We do have a lady, Carrie, is that requesting to speak this evening? Do you have a question, Carrie, or hang on just a minute. I have to ask the commission whether that's any objection. Come on up, Carrie, to the podium. I just got to make sure before we.
Okay. This is where things get a little fuzzy for me and us taxpayers out here, and we sometimes in these meetings I feel there's a lot of semantics going on, and this was said, that was said. So if somebody who was on the commission in 2017 can help me, and I can't remember, so can you raise your hand so y'all know who I'm talking to, or who was on the commission in 2017? Okay, thank you. So from what I understand is when Halliburton came, we created the Washington Way. And when we created the Washington Way, they had to find a funding mechanism to help Jonesboro get to that $20,750,000. And part of that $6 million was the magnet school. Okay, so you all were in a meeting for hours, and it was intense, and it was arguing because we had to create a new funding mechanism how to get Jonesboro funded at $20,750,000. So when that happened, on the books at that time, Jonesboro was going to cost $20,750,000. Boones Creek was going from $30.57 million down to 26, and that's where you gave the pennies, right? From Jonesboro to Boones Creek, because you weren't financing it at that time. We were going to push it back to financing Jonesboro.
We.
The total, I think that's carved out the athletic field.
Right, and part of that was the athletic field too.
Which those pennies stayed in the Boones Creek
Okay.
14. They didn't move to the general fund to pay for that.
Okay, which is fine, because
And also, Carrie, if you'll remember, we cut out the auxiliary gym
yes, I remember that.
from
The
Boones
auxiliary gym
Creek.
was
We
cut out
also
'cause
cut out several.
they had to chop down Boones Creek.
Yeah,
to
we
get
had
it
to do
fit
some
this
cutting on
amount.
that
Oh yeah,
to
I
make
remember.
those pennies work at Jonesboro.
So this is where my question really comes into play, is the school board at that time had $15,628,000 in other projects. That was all their capital needs funds. That was the roofs, the HVAC, all these projects that their list changes. I mean, it does, because needs change. I mean, we all have households. My heat pump went out. I mean, I wasn't expecting to spend $6,000. Here you go. You have to spend it. So, you know, I get needs change. But anyway, so $15,628,000. What is the total right now currently that's on the list? I didn't get a paper, so.
20 for fiscal 20 and 21,
1318. So they were close at guessing what their priority list was in 2017. So at that time, when the commission that was sitting here then, Mitch Meredith called it the conservative Washington way, because it was going to go from financing $100 million, because everything was going financed just the way it is right now. But at that time, it was going to, the previous commission approved to finance $67,780,000. So what I'm wondering is what changed, how, and that commission voted on it, and it was a very heated meeting. That commission voted, only one person voted no. I'm not going to call them out because that's okay. It doesn't matter. But that commission said, okay, we can take on this extra $67,280,000 in debt. So this is my concern. If we push this project back to 2028, the jail is probably going to have to increase in size. We know our jails are getting full. You're talking about what if the jail falls in? There's money. So if we put this on a shelf for 2028, this is the reality of this happening is no. I mean, we can already say we're just going to put it up here and dust it off, and we can hope that 2 commissions away, they will find a funding mechanism for Jonesboro. But the main question that I have is if that commission said, okay, we do have the money to fund $67 million in new debt, this funding new debt's $56 million with everything included. So I'm just trying to understand, it's lower than what was originally anticipated. So is it because we have a new commission? The total for all the capital projects that was going to be borrowed from the beginning in 2000, when you all reorganized it in 2017, was $67,780,000 was what was said was going to be financed, which came down by not financing Boones Creek. The numbers I have are 67, but now we're at 56, so it actually looks better than what was anticipated in 2017. So if it looks better now than it did then, what we can't understand as taxpayers, why is it a problem now?
I'm going to guess about looking at the numbers. It goes back to the other question. Those needs, those capital, $15 million in capital needs, weren't getting done.
Right.
They were being deferred.
But is there not a way to look at your, because I'm sure you came in here with these reports, can you email us out as taxpayers the conservative Washington way on how this was going to be funded 2 years ago? Because this was, I mean, could you do that? Okay, awesome. But it was the January 2017, and I'm sure you had the pennies and all that done. That would help us understand of why this money has changed. And then the commission approved unanimously. And to be correct, 20 million did not, I mean, the 20 million was what we were getting. That's what the commission voted on. That did not include the part of Johnson City. That's where that number is huge, because we decided to borrow Jonesboro, not Boones Creek. And I get why you all did that. I have no qualms about it. I would do that at my household too. But now it looks like this gigantic beast out here and scaring taxpayers to death, that if you would have financed it a little here and there, it wouldn't be this giant monster that taxpayers are scared of. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. All right. Mr. Reeves?
I'll make this pretty simple. Just this February, we had a sheet, and this is Mitch Meredith's work. I didn't change anything. Some of the sheets I've given you I've changed, but this is his. He's got a sheet up there today that the Boones Creek penny disappeared. Just last month it existed. Okay? So, and then they said, well, we'll take the $14 million out of the ball fields that he has listed on the sheet for 2022. Well, if you do that on his very sheet from February, none of it's in the red. None of it is in the red. Okay. That's simple. Another thing, too, somebody asked this question. It's a legitimate question. I liked it, but I had the answer. According to the CAF report done in January, that's done by the state, handed in January, the estimated cash balance on 6/30/2019, according to the books, will be $56 million, not $30 or $40 million. I got that with me. It also includes an estimated cash balance of $28 million in the capital projects fund. See, the one thing we haven't even talked about is, we're going to vote on a roof on Jonesboro probably when we're done here. That's $1 million you guys could have spent a week ago. But that's equal to $2 million off debt service. So 56 is no longer 56, it's 54 if we put that roof off, because that building's going to be empty in 2.5 years. Now, I'm not a roof patcher. I don't know how bad it is. Maybe it's fallen in. It's got to be done. But we all know if we spend $1 million in cash, we save $2 million in debt service. Okay? The $7 million that he alluded to and that Kent asked about very sharply, it includes a roof for Jonesboro and a roof for Bones Creek. Look at your list. It's in the $7 million. You just move those two things, just those two things, two roofs that we don't know if we're even going to need. Okay? That saves you $4 million off that 56. They don't want to do this project. And I get it, because they want to have this money down the road. So as we get closer and we can move the numbers start getting in the red, and we got to worry about a tax increase. I stood right here in July 2016 and said, you think you're going to build a Boones Creek school and renovate Jonesboro? You're crazy. And here I am. Not wrong. And yeah, it changed when Halliburton came in with the Washington Way. And there's a resolution that says $20,850,000. That's what the school board's been working on. We can show all these schemes. Scheme 6 was presented July of 2018. I'm assuming that Mr. Tony Street knows his job. And he did construction costs as of July of 2018, not construction costs of 2017. Shell game. It's a big shell game. And I'm one of the few that has watched it since 2006. I just watched it happen tonight. February paper shows an extra penny left on Boones Creek. All of a sudden, so we can get a bunch of red numbers, that penny disappears. I gave you guys papers back in February that showed if we just borrowed the money for Boones Creek and borrowed the money from Jonesboro with Mitch Meredith's numbers, we only have to borrow $46 million. But he wants to include these other capital projects, which are their legitimate projects. Maybe we need to sit down with the school board and say, hey, can these projects be moved? Do they have to be done this year? They're not allocated. And nobody wants to answer the $17 million sitting in a pile of cash that is allocated for education and capital projects. What is that money allocated for? That's the number as of June 2018. $17 million cash earmarked for education capital projects. Which projects are they for? Is it all money for Boones Creek? Is there still some money laying around that they've been collecting for Jonesboro? We don't get an answer. We're not paying cash. We're going to borrow every dime of it. Scary.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
You don't mind?
No, I don't mind.
Well, my daughter-in-law's mother was in the Greenwood, South Carolina school system for years and years until she retired. And they have a wheel tax, and you brag about defeating it. But you know that would give, or it gives in South Carolina $60 per license tax for education. Now, I can't verify that. That's what I was told. And I think that would have helped us a lot. And I would love to see that brought up again for education only.
That's a subject matter that can be discussed.
James? I appreciate you coming up tonight, and I surely don't want to debate the wheel tax tonight.
Me neither.
I would like to stick to Jonesboro School, and I appreciate your comments.
No
I really do.
All right.
Thank you, James, as always. Mitch, would you like to have some rebuttal on those remarks? And I don't want to hear any school wheel tax talk.
Well, okay. The 17 million, yeah, there's cash sitting in capital projects. It's there. And then if it was 17 million at the end of June, then so be it. But we have a construction contract with Burwell for 25.3 million, of which not all of that was spent as of June 3rd. So that's what that cash is there for, is to continue to fund those obligations. When you pull the trigger to let a contract for any renovation work or for a new Jonesboro K-8, before you can sign that contract, you have to have those funds in hand. That means you have to go to the debt market and borrow those things for however long it's going to take the project to process. We don't do construction loans. It'd be nice if we could. It would reduce our borrowing cost, because we pay 4% on all that money that we borrow, but it sits there earning, 1% or 1.5% while we perform the project. So that was really the main thing I wanted to touch on. And as far as the penny going away, I just have to pull that model out. As y'all know, we've gone through a gazillion models. I'm trying to give you the thing that's most current, and I know there's stuff out there that's going to come back, but it was here at that point in time. Well, the underlying assumptions may be different. I don't know. If you have a real question, and either for the public or any of you all, feel free to give me a call, come up to my office, we'll pull out the information, we'll sit down and look at it. I mean, it's numbers. It's math. It's what it boils down to. It's what I'm trying to accomplish. So.
All right. Thank you, Mitch. Mayor, thank you for all your hard work and getting these facts together. Mr. Fleener, I did not get to call on you, but if you'll come up to the podium, and Ms. Dillinger, you can be next, if you would like. Thank you.
I got a couple of comments I was wanting to say. Scheme 2 and Scheme 6 are the only two that'll fit Jonesboro what they have today. Just want you all to know that. Scheme 3, 1, 4, 5 is not the same size as what kids go to Jonesboro today. The decline in enrollment, that's no lie. You all see it's on there. We hope we're changing something with this TCAT center. The trajectory we bring in some young families here. I would like to ask, though, a couple of things that come on my mind today was Ridgeview and Grandview, 11 years old, is that about right? Will we get any money back from them in 8 years, or were they borrowed for 20 years, or did we pay cash for them? 30 years. Yeah. That's 18 years off. That ain't going to help none. Okay.
That's where that 20, 30
comes back. Okay. But I just wanted to let you know that the 2 and the 6, I wish I was under the assumption, I know when being on the school board, the 20.75 was what we had, to do something with. Obviously, that was wrong. So we'd love to sit down with you and talk to you. I think any of us would to find out a common ground on this and do something that we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleener. We definitely been a meeting of information, and I appreciate everybody's hard work. Is there any other comments or anything else left to be said before we adjourn for just a minute or two and come back in regular session? All right. Let's take about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back to regular session and get started on our special call meeting.